The sound of shattered porcelain cut through the air like a gunshot. In that split second, everything stopped. The marble floors, the crystal chandeliers, the imported silk curtains that cost more than most people's cars. None of it mattered anymore. Because in the center of that pristine living room, surrounded by wealth that could feed a small country, stood a young black woman holding the pieces of her dignity in her hands. Her name was Maya Johnson. She was 24 years old, and she had just been accused of destroying a family heirloom worth more than she'd earn in 5 years. Eleanor Whitmore towered over her, not in height, but in presence. This woman didn't need to raise her voice to make people tremble. She owned half the real estate in the city. She sat on charity boards. She threw galas where champagne flowed like water, and politicians lined up to shake her hand. Her heels clicked against the floor like a judge's gavel. Her eyes were cold, sharp, unforgiving. She pointed one perfectly manicured finger at Maya and said the words that would echo through that house for days to come. "You dare raise your voice at me?" Maya's hands were still shaking, not from fear, from adrenaline. Because seconds earlier, she had lunged forward to catch Eleanor's 3-year-old grandson before a falling vase could strike his head. The boy had been running, playing, being a child. The vase had been perched too close to the edge of an antique table. Physics did what physics does, but Eleanor hadn't seen that part. She had only walked in to see her maid standing over broken porcelain, her grandson crying, and chaos in her perfectly controlled world. Maya tried to explain. Her voice was calm, steady, respectful but firm. She described what happened, how she had seen the vase tipping, how she had grabbed the child first, then reached for the vase, how it had slipped through her fingers, because saving a life mattered more than saving glass. She didn't grovel, she didn't beg, she simply told the truth, and that was her first mistake. Because in Eleanor Whitmore's world, the help didn't get to have a version of events. They apologized, they accepted blame, they knew their place. Eleanor's face flushed red. The other staff members scattered to the edges of the room like roaches when the lights turn on. A housekeeper pretended to dust a surface that was already spotless. The butler suddenly found urgent business in the hallway. The chef became very interested in inspecting the baseboards. Nobody wanted to be next. They had all worked for women like Eleanor before. They knew how this story ended. "In this house," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper, "employees don't argue with me. You're fired." The words fell like an executioner's blade. Final, absolute, non-negotiable. The room seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere in the distance, a clock ticked. A bird sang outside the window. Life continued as if a young woman's livelihood hadn't just been destroyed over a misunderstanding and wounded pride. Maya stood there for a moment, absorbing the reality. She had bills to pay, student loans, a mother who depended on her. This job had been hard to get. The agency had warned her that Eleanor was demanding, but paid well. Maya had needed the money. She had swallowed her pride and accepted. But now, standing in that mansion surrounded by more wealth than she could comprehend, Maya made a choice. She slowly untied her apron, the crisp white fabric that marked her as the help, the uniform that made her invisible to people like Eleanor. She folded it carefully, precisely, as if it were made of the finest silk instead of cheap polyester. She placed it on the table beside the shattered vase, and then she did something that nobody expected. She looked Eleanor Whitmore directly in the eye, not with anger, not with tears, with something far more powerful, certainty. "One day," Maya said quietly, "you'll understand that respect can't be bought." Then she turned and walked toward the door. Her steps were measured, dignified, unhurried. She didn't storm out. She didn't slam anything. She simply left, like a queen departing a room full of peasants. The other servants watched her go with a mixture of awe and terror. Nobody spoke to Eleanor Whitmore like that. Nobody. And yet this young woman, this maid, who had been there less than 3 months, had just delivered a truth that landed harder than any insult. Eleanor stood frozen for a moment, then threw her head back and laughed. It was a sharp, brittle sound. The audacity, she muttered to herself. The absolute audacity of these people. She snapped her fingers at the butler. "Clean this up, and call the agency. Tell them I need someone who actually knows how to follow instructions." Then she walked away, her heels clicking against marble, already dismissing Maya Johnson from her mind like yesterday's trash. But outside, Walking down that long circular driveway lined with rose bushes that required a full-time gardener, Maya Johnson wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She pulled out her phone and sent a simple text message. Just 3 words. It happened again. The response came back within seconds. "Come home, sweetheart." Maya smiled. A small, knowing smile. Because Eleanor Whitmore had no idea what she had just done. She had no idea who she had just humiliated. She had judged a book by its cover, a woman by her uniform, a human being by her tax bracket, and that mistake was about to cost her everything she thought money could protect. Because Maya Johnson carried a secret, a truth so powerful it could shake the foundations of Eleanor's carefully constructed world. That young woman walking away with nothing but a backpack wasn't what she seemed. And very soon, Eleanor Whitmore would discover that respect truly cannot be bought. But humiliation? Humiliation can be earned, and she had just earned every bit of what was coming. The whispers started before Maya's car had even left the property. By nightfall, every servant in Eleanor Whitmore's employment knew what had happened. They gathered in the kitchen after Eleanor had gone to bed, speaking in hushed tones over leftover food that cost more than their weekly salaries. The head housekeeper, a woman named Rosa who had worked there for 12 years, shook her head slowly. "That girl was different," she said softly. "She treated us like family. She ate with us. She helped me carry laundry when my back hurt. She never acted like the work was beneath her." The others nodded. In 3 short months, Maya had made an impression that most employees never managed in years. She had learned everyone's name, remembered their children's birthdays, offered to cover shifts when someone was sick. She had a warmth about her, a genuine kindness that seemed out of place in a house as cold as Eleanor's. And now she was gone, erased, replaced before the broken vase was even swept away. But Eleanor Whitmore saw it differently. The next afternoon, she sat in a restaurant that required reservations 6 weeks in advance, surrounded by women who measured their worth in designer handbags and vacation homes. Over $30 salads, she recounted the story with theatrical flair. "You should have seen her face when I told her she was fired," Eleanor said, laughing. "These young people today think they can talk back to anyone. I don't care what generation you're from. In my house, you follow my rules or you leave." Her friends clucked their approval like well-trained chickens. "You're absolutely right, Eleanor. Standards matter. It's so hard to find good help these days." They raised their glasses of wine that cost more per bottle than Maya's weekly paycheck. They toasted to Eleanor's firm leadership, her refusal to tolerate disrespect, her high standards. None of them asked if maybe, just maybe, there was another side to the story. Because women like Eleanor didn't have to consider other perspectives. Money insulated them from consequence. Meanwhile, across the city, in a neighborhood where the buildings were shorter and the cars were older, Maya sat at a small kitchen table with a cup of tea. Her apartment was modest, clean but simple. The furniture was second-hand but well-maintained. Through the window, she could see children playing basketball in the street. Someone's grandmother sitting on a stoop watching the world go by. This was home, real home, not the marble mausoleum she had just been fired from. She wasn't crying, wasn't raging. She was reading through paperwork for a charity gala scheduled in 2 weeks, an event she had volunteered to help coordinate months earlier, long before she had taken the job at Eleanor's house. Maya smiled as she reviewed the guest list. Everything was falling into place, not the way she had expected, but sometimes the universe had better plans than the ones we made ourselves. Back in Eleanor's world, excitement was building. Her assistant had just delivered news that made her heart race with ambition. Charles Johnson had confirmed his attendance at her annual fundraising gala. Charles Johnson. The name alone carried weight in circles Eleanor desperately wanted to penetrate. He was a philanthropist, a businessman, the founder of a charitable foundation that had donated hundreds of millions to causes across the country. But he was also famously private. He rarely made public appearances. He didn't do interviews. He didn't chase attention or status. When Charles Johnson attended your event, it meant something. It elevated you, validated you, opened doors that money alone couldn't unlock. Eleanor threw herself into preparation like a general planning a military campaign. She hired new decorators to transform the ballroom. She revised the menu 3 times. She personally approved every flower arrangement, every lighting cue, every detail down to the napkin placement. This event had to be perfect. Charles Johnson would see her at her finest. He would be impressed. He would tell others. Her social standing would reach heights she had only dreamed of. The night of the gala arrived with all the spectacle Eleanor had orchestrated. Photographers lined the entrance. Luxury cars arrived in a steady stream, depositing men in tuxedos and women in gowns that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The champagne was French. The orchestra was world-class. The guest list read like a who's who of wealth and influence. Eleanor stood near the entrance, in a dress that had required 3 fittings, greeting guests with the practiced charm of someone who had spent her entire life in rooms like this. Then the energy shifted. A black limousine pulled up to the entrance, sleeker and more elegant than anything else that had arrived. The crowd turned, conversations paused, even the photographers stopped adjusting their cameras. The door opened. A distinguished older gentleman stepped out first, tall, dignified, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. Charles Johnson had arrived. But he wasn't alone. From the other side of the limousine stepped a young woman. She wore an evening gown the color of midnight. Her hair was styled elegantly. She moved with grace and certainty, and when the light caught her face, Eleanor Whitmore's blood turned to ice. It was Maya. Not Maya the maid, not Maya in a polyester uniform with her hair tied back, but Maya transformed, radiant, beautiful, confident. And she wasn't arriving as a volunteer or a staff member. She was arriving on the arm of Charles Johnson himself. He leaned down and said something to her. She laughed, a genuine, warm laugh. He placed his hand on her back protectively, lovingly, like a father with his daughter. The crowd parted as they walked inside. Eleanor stood frozen, her practiced smile cracking like thin ice over deep water. Her mind raced through possibilities. Coincidence, mistaken identity, some kind of sick joke. But as they came closer, there was no denying it. Maya Johnson. The maid she had fired, the girl she had humiliated, was walking into her gala as the guest of honor's beloved daughter. Someone near Eleanor whispered, "Is that Charles Johnson's daughter? I heard she keeps a low profile." Another voice responded, "I heard she works ordinary jobs to stay grounded." Something about testing people's character. The words hit Eleanor like physical blows. She looked around desperately, but there was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. Because Maya had just looked up, met her eyes across the crowded room, and smiled, not with cruelty, not with revenge, but with the quiet certainty of someone who knew that truth always, always comes to light. The ballroom buzzed with energy, but Eleanor Whitmore stood in the center of it feeling completely alone. Around her, guests whispered and pointed. The music played, champagne flowed, but none of it mattered anymore because the foundation of her carefully constructed evening had just cracked wide open. Charles Johnson moved through the crowd with ease, greeting donors and shaking hands. He had the presence of someone who didn't need to announce his importance. Everyone simply knew. And beside him, matching his grace step for step, was Maya Johnson, his daughter. Eleanor's mind reeled. How had she not known? How had the agency not mentioned this? How had Maya herself not said anything? But even as the questions flooded her thoughts, she knew the answers didn't matter. What mattered was that she had fired this young woman, had humiliated her, had treated her like she was disposable. And now, in front of everyone who mattered in this city, that decision was about to haunt her. Charles Johnson's story was legendary in business circles. He had built his fortune from nothing, worked his way through college, started a company in his garage, grew it into an empire. But unlike so many wealthy men, he had never forgotten where he came from. His charitable foundation focused on education, poverty relief, and creating opportunities for people the system had overlooked. He didn't believe in handouts. He believed in hand-ups, in giving people the tools and respect they needed to change their own lives. And he had raised his daughter with those same values. Maya had grown up with wealth, but never with entitlement. Her father had made sure of that. From the time she was young, he had taught her a lesson that most rich children never learned. If people know your name before they know your heart, he would tell her, you'll never discover who truly respects you as a person versus who respects your bank account. So Maya had made a choice. She worked regular jobs, used her mother's maiden name sometimes, dressed simply, lived modestly, not because she was ashamed of her father's success, but because she wanted to understand the world as most people experienced it. She wanted to know who she was when the money and status were stripped away. And in doing so, she had discovered something painful but true. She had learned that people like Eleanor Whitmore existed everywhere. People who judged others by their uniforms instead of their character. Who believed that wealth gave them the right to treat service workers as less than human. Who measured worth in dollars instead of dignity. Maya had been yelled at by customers in retail stores, dismissed by managers, treated as invisible by people who would have fawned over her if they had known her last name. Each experience had strengthened her resolve, had deepened her understanding, had made her more committed to the values her father had instilled. Now, standing in Eleanor's ballroom, those experiences were about to bear fruit. Charles Johnson approached Eleanor with Maya beside him. The crowd around them grew quiet. You could feel the tension like electricity in the air. Eleanor extended her hand, trying to salvage the moment with social graces. "Mr. Johnson," she said, her voice slightly too high, too forced. "I'm so honored that you could attend. I've heard such incredible things about your work." Charles took her hand briefly, politely, but his eyes were not warm. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "I've heard quite a bit about you as well. My daughter has told me a great deal." The words landed like stones. Eleanor's eyes flicked to Maya, then back to Charles. Her mind scrambled for the right response. An excuse, an explanation, anything to stop what she could feel coming. But Charles didn't give her the chance. His voice remained calm, measured, but every word carried the weight of judgment. "She told me how she prevented your grandson from being injured by a falling vase, how she tried to explain what happened, and how you fired her for defending herself with dignity and truth." The guests nearby had stopped even pretending to have other conversations. They were listening, watching, bearing witness. Eleanor felt her face flush hot. "There was a misunderstanding," she stammered. "I didn't know." "You didn't know who she was," Charles interrupted gently. "And that's precisely the point. You didn't need to know. She was a human being in your employment. She saved your grandchild from harm, and you repaid her with humiliation." Maya stood silent beside her father. She didn't gloat, didn't add to Eleanor's shame. She simply stood there with quiet dignity, letting the truth speak for itself. And that somehow made it worse. Because if Maya had been angry, if she had been vengeful, Eleanor could have painted her as bitter or vindictive. But this calm, this grace, left no room for Eleanor to be anything but exactly what she was. Someone who had judged a book by its cover and been found wanting. Charles continued, "I've spent my life believing that true character is revealed not in how we treat our equals, but in how we treat those who can do nothing for us. The people who serve our food, who clean our homes, who make our comfortable lives possible. If we can't treat them with basic human respect, then all our wealth, all our status, all our charity work means nothing. It's just performance, just ego dressed up as virtue." Several board members in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. A few donors exchanged glances, because Charles Johnson wasn't just talking about Eleanor anymore. He was holding up a mirror to everyone in that room, asking them to consider their own behavior, their own assumptions, their own treatment of people they considered beneath them. Eleanor felt the ground crumbling beneath her feet. She looked around desperately for support, for someone to defend her, but faces that had been warm an hour ago were now carefully neutral, cool, distant, because in that moment, the social calculus had changed. Being associated with Eleanor was no longer an asset, it was a liability. Not because of scandal, not because of some public outrage, but because Charles Johnson had quietly, calmly revealed that the Empress had no clothes, that beneath all the wealth and all the performance was someone small, someone petty, someone who failed the most basic test of human decency. Maya finally spoke. Her voice was soft but clear. "I didn't come here for revenge, Mrs. Whitmore. I came here because I made a commitment to this charity months ago, and I keep my commitments. What happened between us is between us, but I hope that maybe, just maybe, it helps you see people differently." Then she and her father moved on, continued greeting guests, participating in the event. But the damage was done, not the explosive, dramatic kind, the quiet, irreversible kind, because by the end of the night, Eleanor Whitmore understood that her reputation, her carefully built social standing, had been fundamentally altered, and no amount of money could buy it back. The days after the gala moved slowly for Eleanor Whitmore. She woke each morning in her mansion surrounded by all the markers of success, but something fundamental had shifted. The emails from board members became more formal. Lunch invitations dried up. People who had once competed for her attention now seemed busy. Always busy. It wasn't a scandal exactly. No one was shouting or demanding her resignation from charity boards. It was subtler than that, colder. She had been weighed on the scales of character and found wanting, and wealthy people had a way of quietly distancing themselves from that kind of liability. She found herself walking through her house differently now, noticing things she had never paid attention to before. The housekeeper who had worked for her for over a decade, and whose first name she had to check the payroll to remember. The gardener, who maintained her roses, but whom she had never asked about his family. The chef who prepared her meals but ate his own lunch alone in the kitchen. All these people who made her life possible, and she had never truly seen them. They were functions, roles, invisible hands that kept her world turning, just like Maya had been. Maya. The thought of her brought a flush of shame that Eleanor couldn't shake. She replayed that day over and over in her mind. The broken vase, the accusations, the firing, and those final words that had haunted her ever since. One day, you'll understand that respect can't be bought. At the time, Eleanor had dismissed them. Now they echoed through her sleepless nights, like prophecy fulfilled. She tried to carry on as normal, attended meetings, made appearances, smiled for cameras, but the joy had leaked out of it somehow. The validation she once felt from social status now seemed hollow, empty, like eating a beautiful cake and discovering it was made of foam. Because she had learned a hard truth. Respect and fear are not the same thing. Her employees had feared her. Her social circle had respected her status, but none of them had actually respected her. Not as a person, not in the way that mattered. It took her 3 weeks to work up the courage to do what she knew she had to do. 3 weeks of wrestling with pride and shame and ego. 3 weeks of drafting and deleting emails. 3 weeks of staring at her phone and setting it back down. Finally, on a Tuesday morning, with rain drumming against the windows, Eleanor wrote a simple message to Maya Johnson. I would very much appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I understand if you decline. I wouldn't blame you, but I'm asking. She sent it before she could change her mind. Then she waited. An hour passed, then 2, then 4. Eleanor found herself checking her phone obsessively, something she hadn't done since she was a teenager waiting for boys to call. Finally, just before dinner, the response came. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. There's a coffee shop on Maple Street. I'll meet you there. The coffee shop was not the kind of place Eleanor Whitmore usually frequented. It was small, local, the kind of place where people actually worked on laptops, and the coffee came in ceramic mugs instead of disposable cups. Eleanor arrived early, overdressed in a designer outfit that marked her as clearly out of place. She ordered a coffee she didn't drink and sat at a table by the window, watching the door like a defendant waiting for a jury. Maya arrived exactly on time. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, no makeup, hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked like any other young woman grabbing coffee on a weekday afternoon. She sat down across from Eleanor without ceremony. No handshake, no pleasantries, just waited. Eleanor had rehearsed this conversation 100 times in her head. She had prepared speeches, explanations, but sitting there, facing the woman she had wronged, all those words evaporated. What came out instead was the raw truth. I was wrong. Maya said nothing, just listened. I was wrong about you. Wrong about what happened. Wrong to treat you the way I did. I've spent my whole life believing that money and status meant I was successful, that I was better. But the truth is, I've been measuring success by all the wrong things. Eleanor's hands shook around her coffee mug. This was harder than any business negotiation, harder than any public speech, because it required something she hadn't practiced. Genuine vulnerability. I don't expect you to forgive me, Eleanor continued. I wouldn't, if I were you. But I needed you to know that what happened changed me. Or rather, it showed me who I had become, someone I'm not proud of. Maya spoke for the first time. Her voice was gentle, not cruel, not gloating, just honest. My father taught me something when I was young. He said that forgiveness isn't about erasing what happened. It's about allowing both people to grow beyond it. You hurt me. You humiliated me. But holding on to that anger would only hurt me more. So yes, I forgive you. Not because you're wealthy, not because I want something from you, but because everyone deserves the chance to be better tomorrow than they were yesterday. Tears rolled down Eleanor's face. She didn't try to hide them. didn't apologize for them. She just let them fall. Because in that moment, in that simple coffee shop, she was experiencing something she hadn't felt in years. Genuine human connection. Not transactional, not based on status or money. Just two people being honest with each other. They talked for over an hour. Maya told her about her father's philosophy, about why she worked ordinary jobs, about the lessons she had learned from seeing how people treated those they considered beneath them. Eleanor listened. Really listened. Not waiting for her turn to talk, not planning her response, just absorbing wisdom from someone she had once dismissed as insignificant. When they finally parted ways, something had fundamentally changed in Eleanor. She went home and did something she had never done before. She gathered her household staff and asked them to sit down with her, not as employees, but as people. She asked about their families, their dreams, their struggles, and she listened to the answers. Over the following months, Eleanor transformed her approach to leadership. She revised employment policies at all her properties to ensure fair wages and respect clauses. She started a mentorship program for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, connecting them with opportunities and teaching them professional skills. She used her wealth and influence not to elevate herself, but to lift others. Her social standing changed. Some of her old friends drifted away, uncomfortable with her new priorities. But new relationships formed, deeper ones, based on shared values instead of shared tax brackets. She discovered that respect, real respect, couldn't be bought, but it could be earned. One honest conversation at a time, one act of dignity at a time, one moment of seeing people as human beings instead of functions. The mansion was still made of marble, the chandeliers still sparkled, the imported silk curtains still hung in the windows. But now, when Eleanor walked through those halls, she saw the people who made it possible, and she thanked them, by name, with genuine gratitude, because she had finally learned what Maya had tried to tell her that day. Money can buy a lot of things, power, status, beautiful objects, but it cannot buy character, it cannot buy integrity, and it cannot buy the kind of respect that comes from treating every human being with dignity, regardless of their uniform or position or bank account. In the end, the richest person in any room isn't the one with the most money, it's the one who understands that every person they meet carries inherent worth. That a maid can teach a millionaire, that humility opens doors that pride keeps locked, and that the measure of our lives isn't what we accumulate, but how we treat people who can do absolutely nothing for us in return. Eleanor Whitmore had learned that lesson the hard way, but she had learned it, and that, finally, made her rich in the ways that actually mattered. Every scar tells a story, and every season teaches us something we couldn't learn any other way. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sitting with these stories, for feeling what these characters felt, and for letting their lessons find a place in your own life. If this story touched something in you, that's exactly why we make them. Hit subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. Tap that notification bell, because these lessons come often, and they're better shared. And if you've got a moment, drop a comment below. Tell us what this story meant to you. We read every single one. There's always another season coming, another scar turning into wisdom. We'll see you in the next story.